Back to Miller. Oh my goodness.
Herbert.
Sidearm sling, and it's a touchdown.
Tyrese Maxey.
Oh, good spin move by Filipowski for the news. Give him 9.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beef Up Front podcast here on Pixel Up Media. Your host, Ryan Coyle, joined by Joe Kmetz for our weekly college football preview show. And now we're in November. We're starting to get down to the nitty-gritty, which final teams I will be expecting to see in the playoff, in that Final Four, and we're really starting to get down to it. I think we only have about 10, 11 teams maybe that have a legitimate shot still of getting in. But before we get into the playoff and before we get into another great slate of games ahead, welcome back, Joe, and how are we?
Coyle, as always, fantastic. And as always, thank you for having me on. Like you said, I mean, we're starting to get a little bit of a clearer picture. We saw, two more teams take their second loss, essentially eliminating them from playoff contention. I mean, you look at this playoff ranking here. I mean, like you said, there's 11 teams with one loss or less. So those are the teams that you can say have a real shot at making it or not. LSU losing, took them out of, consideration of being the only two-loss team. Really looking at the other two-loss teams, there's maybe only one team that can make a run, and that's we can talk about that in a minute. But I don't think you're going to see a two-loss team get in. But realistically, I mean, you're starting to see that picture, the window close a little bit more. And this is what makes me so excited for next year with the 12-team playoff. It's going to be so much chaos towards the bottom there. It's going to be awesome. But and like you said, to another great week coming up.
Yeah, so the new rankings, we're recording this on Wednesday, came out on Tuesday night. Top four stayed the same. You got Ohio State at 1, Georgia at 2, Michigan at 3, Florida State at 4. The only other remaining undefeated team that is not in the top 4 right now, besides James Madison, which is a whole different ordeal, is Washington. They're at 9-0 at number 5. Do you have any complaints, any critiques with that top 4, and would you actually have Washington in there over any of those other teams?
Well, don't forget about my Liberty Flames at 9-0 as well.
Sorry about that.
No, I don't have any complaints about the top 5 because at the end of the day, it's going to take care of itself. Ohio State and Michigan are going to have to play at the end of the year. So if you're Washington, I wouldn't be worried about, oh no, we're at number 5 right now. If you go undefeated, you're getting in. There's no way I could see an undefeated team, that's a Power 5 team, of course, getting left out. I mean, you look at this, Ohio State, Michigan are going to have to play. Even, Georgia's undefeated, but they're still going to have to play potentially Alabama or Ole Miss. Well, they're actually playing Ole Miss this week, but then potentially play Alabama in the SEC title game. So if you're Washington, just focus on going undefeated, and you're going to have a likely rematch with Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. You got to get through that first. But even if you are at Oregon or at Texas or in Alabama, everything ahead of you is going to sort itself out. All you can do is really focus on winning. And Coyle, I don't really have any complaints at the moment because I think the top 4 are truly the 4 best teams in the country right now.
What do you make of Oregon being at number 6, though, and Alabama being down at number 8? Because I'm pretty sure Oregon, I off the top of my head, I don't think they have a win over a ranked team this year. I mean, they beat Colorado, but we saw what Colorado is now. That's their only, and then they beat Utah, which is, down multiple people on the offensive side. And then Alabama, they've beaten 3 SEC teams. They beat LSU, which going into last week had the best offense in terms of points per game and yards per game in the country. They beat Ole Miss, who's sitting there at 8-1 at number 9. They shut them down 24-10. And then they had another decent win as well recently too. And their only losses to Texas, who's at 7. They had that Tennessee game where they came back and they beat them by double digits. So they've actually beaten LSU, Tennessee, and Ole Miss all by 14 points each. So what do you make of them kind of sitting down there? And do you really read into that too much? Like if they win out, they're definitely going to still be in.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those weird things. Like I think the fact that, how they lost to Washington is almost helping them. If they had gone out and Washington was ahead the whole game and Oregon lost by 3, that would be one thing. Oregon would probably be at 8 rather than 6. But the fact that, they let Washington score with a minute left, missed a field goal to force overtime, I think that actually helped Oregon in a way because the committee is kind of boxed itself in with its precedent of, if you win a head-to-head matchup, you are going to be behind that team. That's why Bama's behind Texas because if you look at the schedule overall, Bama's schedule is way better than Texas. But at the end of the day, head-to-head has to matter. Texas at 8-1, they beat Bama, who you're saying is really good. Obviously, they are a great team, but Texas still has that win, which is going to go a long way. And I think that's more so the issue here. If Bama hadn't lost to Texas, if they had another loss to anyone else, I think Bama would be at 6. If Texas were to lose another game, I think you're going to see Bama, even if like this week, who off the top of my head, I don't know if Texas has a bye week or not. They play at TCU. If Texas were to lose that game to TCU and Bama and Oregon were to both win this week, I think you'd see Bama jump up to 6 because I think, like you said, their schedule, their resume is way better than Oregon's right now. But at the end of the day, Coyle, like I was saying earlier, if Bama wins out and Oregon wins out, that takes care of Georgia and Washington. And, Oregon getting to avenge that Washington loss would go a long way for them. So I think, they don't really have anything to worry about because also you'd have the Ohio State-Michigan loser falling a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think one of these top teams is going to be very pissed. Like, I think that 4th spot is going to be up for big debate because as long as Michigan beats Ohio State this week and then you get the winner of the Michigan beats Penn State this week, the winner of that Michigan-Ohio State game will most likely roll in the Big Ten title game. So that team will be going in. They'll be undefeated. If Alabama beats Georgia, those two teams are sitting there at 12-1 each, I believe it would be, if Georgia runs the table. Then you're looking at if Oregon beats Washington, you're sitting there with 2 one-loss Pac-12 teams. You have a potentially undefeated Florida State team, like potentially a one-loss Texas team. Like somebody's going to get, I think, left out. That it's going to be in most years. I feel like there's a kind of a clear top 4. You might have some debate for a 5th or 6th team, but like last year was kind of close. But I think there's just going to be one team that gets left out on the outside, and it's going to be ugly unless there is some more chaos down the stretch and one of these teams that already has 1 loss winds up getting 2 losses.
Yeah, Coyle, I agree. And I mean, the one thing I think it would be more troublesome for the committee if Michigan were to beat Ohio State because Ohio State has the win over Notre Dame. That, is going to go, even though Notre Dame lost again and that hurt them a little bit. Notre Dame finishes with Wake Forest, shout out the Demon Deacons, and they finish with Stanford. Even for Notre Dame standards, 2 games they should have no problem with. So most likely Notre Dame is going to finish as a top 25 team at 9-3. So that'll be a big win for Ohio State winning that game on the road. Whereas Michigan, you can argue that obviously they play Penn State this week, but you can make a serious argument that UNLV might be their 2nd best win of the season. UNLV sitting at 7-2 right now. Whereas, like Rutgers might be their best and UNLV might be their 2nd best wins of the season at the moment. If Michigan were to lose and you only have that Penn State win to hang your hat on, which at this point now Penn State would have then had a 2nd loss if, Michigan were to beat them. It's tough with that only being your one quality win. Whereas, Ohio State could, if they were to lose, can say, hey, well, we beat, Notre Dame on top of that. So I think Michigan, that game is not that to say the game isn't important for one team or another, but I think Michigan would be in a lot worse of a spot if they were to lose to Ohio State. And Coyle, like you and I were talking about prior to the show, if, we're going to talk about Michigan, Penn State in a minute, but I'll just bring up this fact now. If they were to all finish at 11-1, Penn State beating Michigan, Michigan beats Ohio State, the tiebreaker would be the combined record of the Big Ten West opponents in conference. Currently, Penn State leads that. I forget the 3 teams they played off the top of my head.
It was Iowa, Northwestern, and Illinois.
Yeah, those 3 teams were a combined 8-10 in conference. So that would be what gets Penn State into the Big Ten title game, which really, you want to talk about chaos. You have, and if Penn State, were to go on and win the Big Ten title game, you have a 12-1 Penn State and then 11-1 Michigan and 11-1 Ohio State. You could make a legit argument that all 3 of those teams deserve to be in the playoff, which is crazy to say. Like, it really wouldn't be out of the question going in if, Florida State and Washington were to take a loss. Like, do we just do the SEC champ and 3 Big Ten teams? Like, that could be a very real conversation on the day or on Selection Sunday. I don't think, I think that'll all work itself out, like I said. But But it's just really interesting. Like, you look at this playoff picture, there's 11 teams with one loss. Even though, Coyle, you think there's no chance Louisville gets in from you and I talking, I think if they were to win out, there's a path. I don't think they're going to win out, by the way. I think they're going to lose at least one more game in the regular season. But I think if they were to win out, you have the Ohio State win the Big Ten, you have Georgia win, then you have two undefeateds, you have Washington win, they're undefeated. Then it comes down between them and Texas, hypothetically, as the other two power conference champs. If Texas were to take another loss, Louisville with one loss might get in as a 4 seed. I know that sounds crazy because that loss to Pitt is terrible, and Louisville's schedule has been really soft. Their best win is a 3-loss Notre Dame team at the moment. But there's a path for them. Penn State, obviously, if they were to win out, that path opens up. Ole Miss is probably in the most trouble, considering the fact they have to play Georgia this week. They already have the head-to-head loss against Bama.
Yeah, they Bama lose twice.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Bama only even has 2 SEC games left because they play at Kentucky this week.
And Auburn.
Play Chattanooga and Auburn. So they would essentially need Bama to lose out, which I don't see happening. So, Ole Miss, that might be one of those, hey, we're 11-1, but, if you have, especially if Bama were to beat Georgia, then there's a lot of chaos.
Yeah, but that's a good thing. Like you said at the beginning, it'll all take care of itself in the end. So without any more, speculation, hypothetical, now we get to some games that are actually on the calendar. But before that, recap last week. We had a great week last week, Joe. We both went 12-6 overall. We both went 5-1 straight up. I went 5-1 against the spread, 2-4 on my over-unders, and then I hit my dog of the day last week. I forget even who it was off the top of my head, but you went 5-1 straight up, 3-3 against the spread, 4-2 on the total. So that made you 12-6 overall, and then you went 1-0 on your lock of the week with Liberty and 0-1 on your dog of the day. So pretty great week from us there, Joe. And let's continue it over into week 11. We start on Saturday, one of the games that we were previously talking about, one of the biggest games on the calendar for the college football year. Number 3, Michigan, with all the noise surrounding the program and the sign stealing scandal and whatever is going on there. Too much to keep up with. At number 10, Penn State. Noon kickoff on Fox. A shame that this isn't a night game, but Michigan is a 4.5-point favorite here. Over under is 43.5. Can Penn State finally get over the hump, Joe, and get this win?
I do. I think Penn State's going to win this game 21-19. So I'm going to take them to cover the 4.5. I think that is a great bet. I do think they'll cover regardless of the outcome. I like the under in this game as well. Penn State defensively is fantastic. Their offense isn't great. I feel like they're going to need a defensive or a special teams touchdown to, win this game. Of course, the first Saturday that I have to work in my young professional career is this Saturday. So I'm going to be streaming that game on my phone while I'm typing at my notes after seeing people all day. But I really do think Penn State's going to win this game at home. I think the off the field distractions are a lot for Michigan. And, a lot of times it can be used as a rallying cry, get the troops together, be like, hey, let's do this for us. No one believes in us. But it's not like they're going out like last week. They got to play Purdue and beat the crap out of Purdue. This is a Penn State team who has backs against the wall, desperately needs a win. James Franklin desperately needs a win against an elite Big Ten team. And like I said, the path to the Big Ten title game is very much still there. A path to the playoff is very much still there for Penn State. I think Drew Aller, as long as he plays competent football, and he only has 1 pick on the season, which isn't talked about enough. I know he hasn't had the most stellar year in terms of stats, but the fact that he's only had 1 interception is very important. If he can, continue to not turn the ball over, play competent football against Michigan, limit the mistakes, because that's what Harbaugh's going to capitalize on. I think that he is going to be able to do that. I think J.J. McCarthy, this is a huge step up in class compared to what he's had to deal with thus far. Like I said, Rutgers probably the best defense. I don't know. I saw a clip. I wasn't actually watching the rankings show last night, but the chair of the college football playoff committee, when talking about Ohio State being number 1, said, well, they played a top defense in Rutgers. So Rutgers this year is being talked about as a quality win, which has never happened in football ever. So, if Rutgers defense is the best he's played, now he's got to go play Penn State 100, 1,000 people are going to be screaming at him the whole time. This should have been the whiteout. I hate that, TV networks made this, a big noon kickoff, but it's going to be an awesome game. I think Penn State's going to be able to, close it late. I think you're going to see McCarthy. He only has 3 picks on the year. I wouldn't be shocked if he has 2 this weekend in Happy Valley.
Yeah, before this, I remember my dog of the day last week was Arizona over UCLA, and that was a winner. So,
yeah, my Colorado started to cut off. If I knew they were, putting the offensive coordinator, demoting him for Pat Shurmur, I would not have picked Colorado to be my dog of the day. They still cover the spread, backdoor cover to cover the spread, but bad dog of the day.
Yeah, so quick note on the Michigan-Penn State game. Penn State is actually 5-2 in their last 7 games at home at Beaver Stadium against Michigan. So I think that's something to take into consideration with this one. But for me, I'm just going to keep it simple. I've seen Michigan play a bunch this year. I've seen Penn State play a bunch this year. And I know this game's in Happy Valley, but I think you have to take into effect this being a noon kick and not a night kick. I was there for a noon game, and it was pretty dead for a place that holds over 100,000 people. It was pretty quiet in there. If this was a night game for Michigan, it would be 10 times more insane, I think. It's just hard to get up for that noon kick. So I'm interested to see if the crowd is able to kind of play a factor in this one, with it being at noon and not a night game. And Michigan also has all that noise surrounding the program with the sign stealing scandal. Like you said, could this be, a rallying cry or something that gets in the way? I think that's something to keep an eye out for, because this is by far Michigan's biggest test of the year. But in the one game where I watched Penn State play an entire game against a legit opponent in Ohio State, they just looked completely overmatched on offense and unable to move the ball. I mean, Michigan hasn't played exactly the 85 Bears every week, but they've beaten their opponents by 24 or more in every single game. Haven't been tested, but I just don't think Penn State's offense is going to be able to keep it up in this game and have a good game like they did last week against Maryland. I don't think Michigan's really that worried on the defensive side of the ball. I expect this to be very similar to that Ohio State game, low scoring, ugly, like a boring matchup, but I just don't think Penn State is good enough in this spot. I think this is a program-defining game for them, a desperate game for them, but I just don't think they have enough. So I'm going to go with Michigan to win this one, and there's going to be some serious questions in Happy Valley at Penn State going forward, whether or not James Franklin deserves to be the coach of this team. So I think Michigan wins this one by a score. I'm going to go Michigan 20, Penn State 13. So Michigan minus 4.5 in the under of 43.5 there. All right, we transition to the SEC now. Number 8, Alabama, who we talked about a bunch already, at Kentucky for a noon kick on ESPN. Bama is a 10.5-point favorite. Over-under sitting at 48.5. Will Alabama continue their recent hot play in the SEC, Joe?
Yeah, I do think they're going to win this game. However, I think Kentucky is going to be able to cover the spread. I know you don't get rich betting against Nick Saban, but I'm going to do just that. I'm going to take Alabama to win 28-20. So I'm going to take Kentucky, like I said, to cover that 10.5. I am going to take the under of 48.5 by the hook. I didn't plan that. I don't like that. That close to the hook there. But I guess like the way Bama plays, I know they had a double-digit wins their past 2 games, but if Daniels doesn't get hurt in the fourth quarter, I think they win that game by a touchdown. I don't think it ends up being a 14-point win, as it did at the end. And they had that big comeback against Tennessee, but their offense really, they have a 3-point win against Arkansas. They have a 6-point win against A&M. I don't know if they'll be able to, win this game by double digits. I think this game will be close. It'll be one of those old school Alabama close games, like where they're in control the whole time, but Kentucky's going to be hanging around. I think this game being in Lexington is going to be huge as well. This is Kentucky's Super Bowl. They're out of any, type of race, whether it's for the SEC, for the playoff, whatever, but you still get a chance. Alabama coming to you. You get a chance to upset the tide. I think the crowd's going to be really into this one. And also, Bama's had 2, albeit with a bye week in between, but they've come off Tennessee and LSU back-to-back. They're riding high off of those 2 wins. Now you have to go to Kentucky, where you get through Kentucky, then you get Chattanooga, then it's the Iron Bowl. And that's Alabama's, whole season is for the Iron Bowl. I think even if Bama ends up winning this game by 10, I don't think they'll win by 11 or more. I really like Kentucky to cover the spread here. Definitely not to win the game, though. I think Milroe will, Milroe's play has been so much better since the start of the season. Really, like, if you were to do an in-season most improved player, I think he would be like a lock for it. He's been really, really, really good. Really like Bama going forward here. And this is definitely one of the toughest games left. I know the Iron Bowl is the Iron Bowl, but I think Kentucky's a better team than Auburn. So you get through this, then you really get to start talking about SEC championship and potentially the playoff.
Yeah, like you were saying about Milroe, I think Alabama as a team as well has just looked better and better, and I think you can make an argument that they're kind of playing the best ball at any team in the country right now, just because they've been going through this SEC stretch and they've beaten all the top teams that they played in conference. We know about the Texas loss, but they've beaten Ole Miss by 14. They beat Tennessee by 14. They beat LSU by 14, and I'm sure Georgia is over there in the East starting to get a little bit worried that Alabama is really picking up some steam at the right time. LSU was able to move the ball in Alabama last week, just like they've been able to do on every team, as we talked about, number one in the country in both points and yards. But they had 478 yards on offense, but Alabama held them to 4 of 11 on third and fourth down. Like, they were getting off the field when it mattered, forced an interception, and they put up 42 points themselves. Really unleashed Milroe on the ground. I mean, they've been trying to, I think, make Milroe more of a passer this year, but they just let him cook on the ground last week. 155 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. That's the recipe for success. I think they really wanted to just get him through the season, get him healthy, and now in these bigger games, let's let him loose a little bit, and that's what they're going to have to do to win potentially the SEC championship, and then if they find their way into the playoff, do some damage there as well. It's going to be with Milroe's legs more so than his arm, but they're just looking better and better, and I think they're showing now that they are not only going to beat you with defense, but they can beat you with their offense as well. I like them to win big in this one. I think this one's not really going to be that close. Kentucky's been a weird team this year, especially in the big spots. It seems like Mark Stoops has been making a lot of excuses, and I just think this is one of those games where Alabama takes it to them. I'm going to go 31-17 Alabama, so Bama minus 10.5 in the under of 48.5. I think this one's going to be pretty similar to what Georgia did to Kentucky a few weeks back and just absolutely steamrolling here. Third game of the week, we go to the ACC for one of the oldest rivalries in college football. Miami at number 4, Florida State, 3:30 on ABC. Florida State is a 14.5-point favorite here, and the over-under is 50.5. Can FSU stay undefeated, Joe?
Yeah, I think they're going to actually win this game pretty big as well. I have them winning 38-21, which normally, I always talk about in rivalry games when there's spreads that big. I don't really like taking the favorite. But I think Florida State being at home is going to be a huge difference here. Miami, I mean, we've seen it with Miami, losing to North Carolina, having that inexcusable loss to Georgia Tech. Then they go last week and they lose at NC State. They needed OT to beat Virginia. They needed double OT to beat Clemson. This Miami team, I just think really it's another year, same old Miami. They're still trying to figure it out, for all these years after – their prominence in the early 2000s. I think they're going to lose this game pretty big. I think Jordan Travis is going to continue to just have a great year. I don't think he's getting nearly as much love as he should. I think Florida State wins this game, puts them at 10-0, then sets them up for their last 2 games of the season where they have to play North Alabama, and then they have to go to Florida at the end of the year, which, anything can happen in that rivalry game as well. But I just don't think Cristobal knows what he's doing. I really don't. I think that he's been exposed too many times now for a guy that can get you the talent, but he just can't seem to put all the puzzle pieces together. We saw it.
Fit it all in.
What?
Can't seem to fit it all in.
No, he cannot. We saw it at Oregon. Like, how many times would, the Ducks be rolling? Then they'd have to go play a physical team in November and just get smashed. Every time Oregon always seemed like, they were a 2-loss team, kind of like how Penn State is right now, where they would have all this hype, fall apart. I know it's only year 2, but saying that now in the portal era, it's like, oh, wow, it's year 2 and you still really haven't figured it out, especially being in, Miami is his alma mater. He should really, next year there's going to be a lot of Cristobal hot seat talks because the fan base at Miami, even though they don't like to show up for the games, they certainly love to put coaches on the hot seat very quickly because Miami is one of those programs that should be near the top of the sport every year, but they just haven't been for so long. They had that year, I think it was 2017, where they were 11-0, then lost their last 3 games of the season. But besides that year, it's been a long time since Miami's been very good. I know they would love to pull off the upset here, but I just don't see it. I got the Noles pretty big in this one.
Yeah, as an FSU kind of supporter all year because of that future, I got them at 20-1, now down to 6-1. This game, for some reason, makes me a little nervous. I'm not really sure why. Florida State's a much better team on the football field, and they've just shown the ability to go out there and win every week. But it might just be the rivalry factor. I'm just a little bit worried about this game. It could get crazy. And as we were talking about with all those hypothetical situations at the beginning, like, well, I think we're still due for one of these top teams to lose a game that no one's expecting, and then it's just like, oh wow, now we have some more chaos on our hands. So could this be the game? I feel like Florida State's the team in the top four that's gotten talked about the least, but they've also been the team I think that's been winning in the most comfortable fashion for most of the year. They could just be due for a slip, so I'm not sure. But Miami coming off terrible loss to that mediocre NC State team last week, I think it was 20-6. But as they say in these rivalry games, throw the record books out the window. Miami, as a rival of Florida State, has a chance to ruin their perfect season and most likely eliminate them from the playoff. FSU will still go to the ACC title game, but I don't think they'll be getting in with one loss, and with that loss being to Miami. But I just do think Florida State will find a way at the end of the day to win this game. They're just that good. They had that swag and confidence to them where it seems like every time that they go out on the field, they just know that they're the better team and they're going to win. Even in last week's 24-7 win over Pitt, that was the first time the entire season they've been held to 31 points, but they still put up 500 yards on offense. So I'm not worried about this team. I think if they do find their way in the playoff, they're equipped enough to compete with an Ohio State, a Michigan, an Alabama, a Texas, a Georgia. And I think that they could very well win that thing. That's why I took them at the beginning of the year. So, as you said, Joe, with North Alabama next week and then traveling to Florida for their last game of the season, I think if they win this game, that they're looking at this 12-0 season in the works. So, I think Miami's going to make this one interesting and cover, but I'll go Florida State winning outright, 31-23. So Miami plus 14.5 in the over of 50.5 hit in there. All right, our fourth game of the week, we go to the Pac-12 now. Number 18, Utah at number 5, Washington, coming off a pretty crazy game against USC last weekend. 3:30 kickoff on Fox. Washington a 9-point favorite, and the over/under is 54.5. Any chaos here, Joe? Does Utah stand a chance going to Washington and getting the win?
No, just because, kind of like what we talked about with Utah all season when they've been on this show. They just don't have the offense to keep up. Even though their defense is very good, Washington's offense, besides that one weird game where they won 15-7 against Arizona State, their offense is just so high powered. Like, you're going to need even a competent offense if you want to stay in a game with them, trying to win it with just your defense. Washington really, though, has seemed to bounce back after those 2 weird weeks, at Stanford and then, at home against Arizona State after the Washington win. This, in my opinion, last week, this was the most impressive win, beating USC, going on the road, really putting, a knife through any hopes USC had at any real significant postseason game. Now you get Utah coming to you. It's going to be a huge 3:30 game. I think this is also a very important game because Washington still has to go to Oregon State next week. We'll definitely have that on the show. That's going to be an incredible game. Oregon State, one of the two-loss teams, I think, that aren't officially dead yet. We can talk about that another day. But I just think Penix, another game, towards Heisman campaign. I really think it's between him and Bo Nix at this point. Bo Nix, is going to get his shot as long as Oregon finishes, and wins out for the Pac-12 title game. But I think just Washington offense too much. Would love to see Utah make this a game, but I just don't trust their quarterback. I don't trust Bryson Barnes to get the job done. 8 TDs and 5 picks on the season. I don't know. Utah is not a fun team to watch at the moment.
Yeah, and last week's USC Washington game was the opposite. I mean, that was one of the funner games I watched all year, and I found myself just actually laughing at the TV some of the time just because of how bad both sides on defense were. But it was just a really entertaining watch. But it's a completely different sport than what if you've been watching Utah, what they're doing. I mean, they were playing really hard, really tough at the beginning of the year, but their lack of talent has really started to show up these past few weeks against some of these tougher conference teams with no Cam Rising. You can't be trotting out third-string quarterbacks and expect to beat Michael Penix and the slew of NFL pass catchers this Washington team has. I'll just keep it simple in this one. I don't see Utah being able to keep up with Washington on the offensive side of the ball, and I think the Huskies continue to roll and remain undefeated. I'm going to go Washington 35, Utah 14. So Washington -9, and the under of 54.5 hit in there. Probably one of the first times for Washington this year. All right, second to last game of the week. We go back to the SEC now. Not a big game, I guess, big picture wise for the season, but just it should be a fun game to watch still. And I guess both of these teams are kind of competing for that number 2 spot in the SEC East. That's number 13, Tennessee, at number 14, Missouri. 3:30 kickoff on CBS. Tennessee is a 1.5-point favorite on the road here, and the over/under is sitting at 58.5. Any chaos in this game, Joe? I'm expecting a fun one.
I think this is going to be the best game of the week, in all honesty. I'm going Tennessee 41, Missouri 34. I think it's going to be a very high-scoring game. Love the over in this one. I'll take Tennessee, minus the 1.5. Even though, I've been saying all year about Joe Milton, how I don't really trust him. I think this is a case of two teams kind of going in the opposite direction. I think you have Missouri coming off a heartbreaking, they had a shot. They had the ball. They were driving with a chance to take the lead. They throw the pick that leads to a field goal, game over. Whereas you have Tennessee, last 2 weeks they were able to beat Kentucky. Then they got to play UConn, basically a bye. Got to rest up, got to, have some fun leading into this game. Tennessee wins this. If Tennessee, does end up winning this game, they get Georgia coming to them, and they get Vandy coming to them to end the season. That's a team, you talk about, if there were ever a path to open up as a 2-loss team, potentially getting in, 2 straight wins over a team ranked 14th, and then you get a win over Georgia. I don't think Georgia is going to lose to Ole Miss, who we're going to talk about next. Sorry to spoil my pick. But if somehow chaos were to happen in that game, all of a sudden the SEC East title game is in Knoxville the following week. If Tennessee were to win this one, that would be unreal. It would be an atmosphere just like last year with the Alabama game. I think Tennessee is going to win this game and set themselves up, as John Rothstein would say, put themselves in position to be in position.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, where I think this is actually the game I think I'm looking forward to the most. Like our last game is Ole Miss Georgia. I think that's going to be a fun one. The Michigan Penn State game, I'm looking forward to just seeing what the outcome is, but I really don't think it's going to be that great of a game. I think this is going to be a cool game to watch. There's a bunch of offense back and forth. Both are, out of the hunt pretty much 95% for anything in the SEC, with both losing to Georgia, unless, as you said, Joe, some major chaos ensues. But should be a really good matchup between two teams that can put up points. I really like the over in this game. Mizzou comes into this game averaging 32 points per game, and Tennessee averaging 34.8 points per game. So you put those two together, I think that you're going to get some fireworks, get the over hitting here. If you're Mizzou, though, I think this is just a huge game for you. You have a chance to continue to build on what has been a pretty special season. I mean, when you think of Missouri football, my thought goes to like a 6-6 to like a 3-9 type team every single year. You have a chance to be like a 9-win squad this year. Give Eli Drinkowitz a big-time job security, maybe even land himself like an extension. I just think this is a huge game for them. And for Tennessee, who last year that looked like they were, revival, kind of back to the top of college football almost, you have a chance to lose to a Missouri team here who you really should never lose to as Tennessee. So I think even without a likely chance to the SEC title game anymore, I think it's still a huge game for both programs. I think we're going to see a lot of fight out of both of them. That's why I think it's going to be a really fun game. But I think Joe Milton is going to turn it over late, and Missouri is going to find a way to win at home as a home dog as well. I love taking the home dog. So I'm going to go Mizzou plus 1.5 in the over 58.5 hit, and with Missouri winning this game 38-35. All right, our final game of the week. Between this, Joe, Michigan, Penn State, and Georgia, Ole Miss, I'm intrigued to hear what you think is actually, the best actual game of the week in terms of significance. But you got number 9 Ole Miss at number 2 Georgia, 7:00 kickoff on ESPN. Georgia's a 10.5 point favorite. Over under is 58.5. And another good thing about this week's schedule, nothing really kind of hitting with each other. You got a lot of spaced out games, so it should be a fun day of college football on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree, Quill. Great data. I can't wait to get home. Because, it's going to stink that I'm going to have to watch the first game on my phone. But after that, I'm getting home. I'm going to be sitting on my couch just watching the games. I can't wait. I think, just because the fact that they're in the same division, Penn State, Michigan's probably the most important game of the week. But this game is right behind him at number 2 because, like I said, if Ole Miss were to pull off the upset, complete chaos in the sport. I don't think it's going to happen, obviously. I'm having Georgia 31, Ole Miss 14. Georgia minus a 10.5. I'm going to go under here. I really think Ole Miss is a little bit fraudulent. I do. If you look at their schedule, ever since the Alabama loss, they have a 6-point win over LSU. Then they beat Arkansas at home by 7, Auburn by 7, smashed Vandy, and then they needed a field goal to beat Texas A&M over last weekend. They're number 9 in the country. I feel like the number 9 team should have a little bit more success and win games by a little bit of a wider margin. And now you have to go to Athens. I think this is a recipe for disaster. We see what Lane Kiffin does when he has to play good teams on the road. We saw it against Alabama. The worst ever was his first year there when he said, "Get your popcorn ready." And then Bama beat him by like 50 points or something like that. Maybe not 50, but I know they smashed them. And Georgia, it seems like all season has kind of been up and down. Coyle, I'm looking at your notes about their against the spread record, which I'll let you say. But I think Georgia, after, kind of being fortunate, that Missouri made that costly, late game interception last week. I think they're going to really come out and smash Ole Miss, lock up the SEC East this week. I think, if they'd win, they'd clinch because everyone else would have at least 2 losses in that division. They would only have 1 game left in the SEC. Really like Georgia here. I think this is going to be another classic. Kirby Smart's just going to stomp your face in. I think this game isn't even going to be close. I think right from the opening kick, Georgia's going to dominate this game. And then it's going to set up for a very interesting game next week in Knoxville. But give me the Dogs big.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. It's like a clash of 2 different styles. You have Georgia, who really wants to be a physical team, and then you have Ole Miss, who wants to be more, a finesse, let's score, beat you 60-59 type team. But the thing that you're saying with Georgia, too, against the spread, I'm pretty sure I bet on them 4 times this year. I took them against Vanderbilt. They were like 30-point favorites. They did not cover that game. I took them last week against Missouri, 15.5, I think it was. They only won by like 9. I faded them against Florida, plus 14.5. Didn't get that one right. And then what was the other game? The Kentucky game, I think, was 14.5 too. I took Kentucky as well. So I'm actually 0-4 on the year betting against Georgia. So whatever I say here, do the opposite, most likely. And if you're listening to Joe and what he likes to say, you'll like my pick as well, because I have Ole Miss covering this game. Another week last week where I was wrong on Georgia. They're now 2-6-1 against the spread, which is why I like Ole Miss to cover this game. I think if you look at the teams that have given Georgia some trouble over the past few years, I'm just trying to use some football logic, and it's just all going to come back to bite me in the end and just make me look dumb, and Georgia's going to find a way to dominate. But if you look at the teams that have given Georgia some trouble the past few years, Ohio State sticks out because they had them down to the wire, and they just had an assortment of playmakers, a really good quarterback, as we've seen with C.J. Stroud, when he's done at the NFL level, and just the ability to spread these teams out and just widen the field, it seems like. And then Alabama a few years ago, when they had Bryce Young and all those playmakers around them, when they beat them in the regular season, we saw it's kind of spread them out, keep things away from the middle of the field where they're really good in the trenches, and see if your playmakers can be better than their guys in the secondary and their linebackers. And if Ole Miss is able to successfully do that, they're gonna have a shot in this game. You look at how Alabama shut this Ole Miss team down, though, to 10 points. If you try and keep things in the middle of the field, dominate the line of scrimmage, then you're going to have a struggle if you're Ole Miss against an Alabama or a Georgia. So if they were able to learn from those mistakes, and Quinshon Judkins and Jackson Dart can go out there, play their capability, they should be able to hang around in this one. And if Georgia were to lose and end this historic winning streak, though, I don't think it'll be at home. I just think that they're too good of a program right now. They're too much of a staple at the top of the college game to find a way to lose this game outright. But I do think Ole Miss is actually going to give them a good fight. I think the play of Judkins has been really good these past few weeks, and I think he's going to have a big day and help this game go over the total as well. But I just think Georgia at home, 10.5 points, it's just – I think Vegas really likes them in the spot, but I'm going to take Ole Miss to find a way to cover. So give me Georgia 34, Ole Miss 28 in an entertaining game that we get Ole Miss plus 10.5 in the over a 58.5 hit. All right, we get into our last 2 segments of the day, the lock of the week, which I have suspended myself from the past 3 weeks, I believe. And wink, wink, it's hit my quote unquote lock of the week with the team that plays in Southern California that wears red and yellow, but they fired my friend, the defensive coordinator, who's been helping me hit those. So we'll see if they can do that this week, playing against the team that wears green and yellow up in the upper Pacific Northwest. But without saying too much, that's my lock of the week. Joe, what is your lock of the week this week after getting back on the winning side last week with Liberty?
My lock of the week is Florida Atlantic, -6.5. They're at home. They're playing East Carolina.
What about college basketball against Loyola Chicago?
I think Loyola Chicago covers. That was one of those.
Wow.
I think 6% of the public is on Florida Atlantic.
Oh yeah, they're going to be the most bet team all year.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I think Florida Atlantic is going to win the game, but I wouldn't be shocked if you see Loyola Chicago backdoor cover or something. Florida Atlantic ends up winning by 7. I think it was 7.5, right, for the basketball game.
It's been up and down, but get back to the gridiron.
I'll keep this one quick. East Carolina had their Super Bowl last week. They had Tulane come to town. They lost 13-10. One of those weird games. East Carolina's 1-8. They are not a good football team. Tom Herman, remember him? Head coach at Florida Atlantic, year 1 there. I think he's going to be able to build a nice little program now. Florida Atlantic in the American Athletic Conference, which is now, especially with SMU leaving, just the CUSA too. Really sad what's happened to the American Athletic. A couple of years ago was the premier Group of 5 conference. Now, isn't not that anymore. I think Florida Atlantic is going to win this game by a touchdown or more pretty easily. Really think East Carolina's a bad team. And that's all I really got. Not a lot of knowledge on this game. Kind of similar to Liberty last week. I'm kind of just firing from the hip here, but I saw 6.5. I was like, I need to take that. I think I bet that this morning. I wouldn't be shocked if I wake up Saturday and the spread goes up to 8.5.
All right, and then our dog of the day, our underdog money line pick. I locked this game in already. Recording this on Wednesday, I locked it in this morning. I think by the time Saturday comes around, I could see them being a favorite. But that's Boston College plus 105. They're playing at home as a 1.5-point dog to Virginia Tech. Both these teams give themselves a pat on the back. They've been better than expected this year. Boston College is already bowl eligible. Virginia Tech is fighting to get there. I think this should actually be a really solid game. It's not going to get a lot of publicity or notoriety, but I think this is actually going to be a good football game. Virginia Tech, though, 0-4 on the road this season. Feels like Boston College is building some momentum. They're riding a 5-game winning streak, and it looks like the program's starting to head in the upward direction. So I think that they're going to find a way to continue to ride that momentum. Virginia Tech, as we said, 0-4 on the road this year. I think this is a good spot for BC to get a win at home. Simple, short little line, nothing crazy there, but Boston College at plus money, I like that.
My dog of the day, and I love this dog of the day, I'm going BYU. BYU plus 250 at home against the Iowa State Cyclones. That's a 10:15 kickoff. Great way, put this on your TV with Oregon USC going on at 10:30, I believe, as well. A night game in Provo, BYU, their first year in the conference. Both teams 5-4. However, if you're looking at the conference record, BYU 2-4, Iowa State 4-2. Iowa State still surprisingly very much alive for a potential Big 10 title game, or Big 12 title game berth. Really like the Cougars in this one. I think they're going to have a fantastic crowd at night. Coming off an embarrassing loss against West Virginia, they get to go back home. You have a team in Iowa State. You can really end their season for the most part. If you beat them here and they have a third loss in conference play. I definitely think they'll cover 7.5. That was almost considering making that my lock of the week as well. The spread's 7.5 at the moment, but really like BYU at home. Give me the Cougars.
All right, well, that'll do it for College Football Show Week 11 in the books. Pretty loaded episode here with all the playoff ranking talk and then covering a bunch of big games as well. So, as always, everyone, thank you for listening. Good luck on your plays this week. Please like, subscribe, and we will talk next week for another big slate ahead.